Day of Dangerous Times Festival. This meeting is why Labour lost and how the left can win. And we've got an absolutely knockout panel. My name is Faisy and I'm going to be chairing this meeting. First we'll have Kate Hudson, who is the General Secretary of CND and also the National Secretary for Left Unity. They'll all speak for about 8 minutes each, and then of course we'll have time for questions and discussion. Great.
Thanks very much. Good to see such a big crowd here this afternoon. I don't know if any of you saw the article by Polly Toynbee last week. She was talking about the Labour leadership contest. And some of the points she made, I think for me, really summed up the question of why Labour lost the election. And she was talking about Jeremy Corbyn's candidacy, and she talked about his anti-Trident position. You know, he's a very strong anti-nuclear campaigner. And she said, it may well be that all the leadership candidates privately are opposed to nuclear weapons, but only Jeremy is going to say it because, quote, Labour in opposition dare not argue against them. The party will be branded as reckless. Now, for me, this sums it up. He's talking about you, Jeremy. And of course, the same no doubt applies to her thinking about many of the policies which Jeremy puts forward, and of course, which many of us share. And there seems to be this bizarre idea from the Labour leadership that you actually have to give the British voter a centre ground, verging on right-wing political position, pro-austerity or austerity light, or you can't win. Now, the reality is that this last election has shown how completely bankrupt and wrong that approach is. And I just want to give two brief illustrations of why I think that is. The most significant factor in the election, if you look at the kind of breakdown of votes and what the overall impact was that the historic Centre Party, with verging on right-wing pro-austerity politics, in other words the Liberal Democrats, was almost completely smashed. So why on earth would Labour want to try now and fill that space? I mean, that's completely bonkers. And then secondly, the Tories won on one of the lowest shares of the popular vote ever, in spite of presiding over the longest decline in living standards for decades. Now, how could that be? Obviously, first past the post is an element in this, but I think that the outcome, what we're actually seeing, is a polarisation to both the left and the right of the major political parties. We see that with the right. We've seen how UKIP has colonised some of the Tory vote, has also taken the BNP, English Democrats and all that sort of thing, but basically is a kind of polarisation to the right and the far right there. And then of course we've also seen this something of a polarisation to the left. The SNP and the Greens both took votes from Labour, and of course Plaid Cymru in Wales held its ground as well. And I think it's correct to say that people considering themselves as voting to the left of Labour and for parties that explicitly attacked austerity and, by the way, were anti-Trident, increased from 3.3% of the vote in 2010 to 9.2% of the vote in 2015. So that's a huge, relatively huge increase for kind of left-oriented anti-austerity parties. And by the way, for those of you who are aware of kind of the political parties and structures in Europe, that's more or less comparable to the type of votes that left parties tend to get across Europe. So in that framework, Labour was austerity light at best, and people weren't motivated to come out and vote for it. You know, and we saw the results. The Greens surge, the SNP surge, and so on. And in my view, Labour should have had a strong anti-austerity, anti-Trident message. And just to return to the Polly Toynbee point, because I think it's so absolutely crass, she obviously hasn't looked at the opinion polls over the last decade, which show that the majority of the population is actually anti-Trident. So to scrap Trident would be a vote winner, not a vote loser. You know, how out of touch are the Labour Party leadership with what ordinary people actually want? But this out of touchness isn't, in my opinion, a sudden problem. I think there's been an irredeemable political degeneration of the Labour Party for over 2 decades, but it's not a kind of unique thing. All the social democratic parties in Europe over the last 2.5 decades have gone through exactly that same process. So it's more that Labour hasn't bucked the trend. It's part and parcel of the rightwards move of social democracy throughout Europe. So what's the actual situation that we're facing now then in terms of moving forward for the left? Well, there's a very small actual popular political support for the Tories. That's a big thing in our favour. There's an increasing rejection by an active minority of the population for Tory policies. We've seen that already. There's an increasing militancy across the sectors worst hit by Tory cuts. We saw the fantastic People's Assembly demonstration last weekend, the exceptional DPAC and disabled campaigns protests on Wednesday. Those types of protests will continue and will escalate as further Tory parties bite. And I think that this mobilisation and kind of intensification of protests and opposition needs to coalesce around policies as well as just being around protest and the organising and bringing together of protest and campaigns. There has to be a policy, clear policy orientation of that as well. Now in Europe, obviously we see policy, very clear policy alternatives coming to the fore. Syriza, an anti-austerity government and so on. Their fight is our fight too. You know, you can't find austerity in one country. It's a fight all across Europe. Obviously the situation is different here. These are some of the issues we have to address. The first past the post system, for example. That's one of the reasons why Labour has stayed on the radar so much, even though its policies have shifted so far to the right. There's also the historic role of Labour as being founded by the trade unions and bringing a broad political church. I think that's one of the reasons why we haven't had a kind of historically very significant communist movement in Britain in the way that they have done all across Europe. You know, different nature of the origins of the Social Democratic Party. But I think there are huge opportunities for us. The kind of challenge to dominant policies, the challenge to the neoliberal narrative has a new and unexpected focus, which is obviously with us this afternoon. Just a couple of final points, Stacey. I think Jeremy standing for leader of the Labour Party is an enormous opportunity for the left as a whole. And I think his candidacy galvanises the issues and the forces together which elsewhere are outside of social democracy, the social democratic parties, or have been kind of splits from social democratic parties. Oscar Lafontaine in Germany is an obvious example for that. So I think in terms of priorities for the left, just 2 or 3 points, very brief points. I think our top priority is to back Jeremy. I think we'll all do that in different ways, because obviously if we're in parties which stand against Labour, we can't join Labour to support Jeremy, but other people can and must do that. I say this not because I've got, some people have said, you've got illusions in Labour if you think we should support Jeremy Corbyn. Well, that's not the reason I support Jeremy, or they say, you know, I think Labour can be reclaimed. Well, I don't think that either, but I think Jeremy's candidacy is the best opportunity to articulate and get popular exposure for the policies really necessary to provide an alternative for the working class and the movement. And Jeremy is an extraordinarily fine exponent of those policies. So taking that, Jeremy's support for Jeremy as our top priority, then we also must support the Syriza government in Greece. These are obviously two interrelated elements of the anti-austerity struggle. If Greece votes no, and I'm sure we've all been following the news with great urgency, they will need political and material support to help them in their position, to enable them to sustain that opposition to the Troika and its criminal policies. So we will have to be part of a very active campaign across Europe. So back Jeremy, solidarity for Greece, and then thirdly, step up the militant mobilisation that has already begun to take place through the People's Assembly, through the campaigns and so on. Because I think that it's only in advancing these three interlinked struggles together that will make the kind of progress we need in building and taking forward new movements, maybe a new party of the left, which will champion the type of society, the alternative society that we all want to see. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Kate. Next up is Owen. Owen Jones is a regular columnist in The Guardian and is author of The Establishment and How They Get Away with It. Owen.
Well, thank you. That's great to see you all here. I haven't slept for about 48 hours. If I start hallucinating midway through, do accept my apologies in advance. But it's great to see so many people here on a Saturday night, though. What are we doing? I just want to start by embarrassing Jeremy. I'm always proud to share a platform with Jeremy over the years, but I'm particularly proud to share a platform with him tonight. Jeremy is one of the most principled and decent and honourable MPs we've ever had in the history of British democracy. And not only that, but he's also the 4-time winner of Beard of the Year. And if you think they just hand that accolade out willy-nilly, then you're kidding yourself. But look, also, he's a principled man who takes the right call at a time when it's difficult and you're attacked for it, but you end up vindicated. Numerous examples. He marched against Saddam Hussein when our governments were arming into the teeth as that regime gassed the Kurds. He marched against apartheid when our government called the ANC terrorists. He called for negotiations with Sinn Féin as the basis for peace in Northern Ireland when that was attacked as an extremist thing to do. He stood, and I stand here with the lesbians and gays support the miners t-shirt, he stood for LGBT rights at a time when you were castigated for being on the loony left for doing so. Time and time and time again, he made the right call and was vindicated in due course, and that is exactly the same with austerity, workers' rights, tax justice. He's standing for the causes, the great causes of our time, and he will be vindicated, and that's why we must support him. Now, why Labour lost? Well, I'll just quickly explain why I think Labour lost the election, because I think it's quite abundantly clear. I think there's three main reasons. Firstly, the double whammy of Scotland. Labour destroyed themselves in Scotland. Scotland was the heartland of the Labour Party. It produced its first ever leaders. And what happened in that country was they abandoned the progressive space they once had and allowed the SNP to fill that vacuum. They treated their own voters as voting fodder to be ignored. They presided over rotten boroughs. Many of them never even knocked on a single door, practically, of their own constituents. And then, whatever you think about the issue of independence, they formed a strategic alliance with the Conservatives, who in Scotland are slightly less popular than tuberculosis, in a campaign based on fear. And that was it for Scottish Labour. They imploded, and the consequences were losing 40 out of 41 seats that they once held before this election. But that rebounded in England and Wales, and we have to be clear about that. That allowed the Conservatives and the right-wing media to fan English nationalism and resentment, which they did ruthlessly and unapologetically. The idea of that this party, which wants to preside over the breakup of the country, blah, 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 will be holding this Labour government to ransom. It had a devastating impact in parts of England and also in Wales as well. And that is an important factor in terms of what happened. The second was the financial crisis, the global financial crisis, and how it's pinned to Labour. Now, I was an harsh critic of Blair and Brown, so how perverse that someone like me had to defend their spending record against their own people. The fact that, you know, the argument was the reason we're in this crisis is because Labour spent too much money on schools and hospitals and nurses and teachers, even though the Conservatives backed their spending pound for pound until the end of 2008. And then, you know, you get people, I often attacked, you always attack Labour's record in office, when actually it was people like me making the point over and over again that it wasn't that spending that caused that crash. The spending the Conservatives backed pound for pound. It was the banks they failed to regulate at a time when the Tories were demanding even less regulation. But that again cut through. The idea of why hand the keys back to the driver who crashed the car in the first place, and the other cliches that they relentlessly threw at us. That idea that overspending caused the crisis, so why allow Labour to come to power again? And thirdly, the total lack of any coherent alternative from the Labour Party, who randomly threw policies into the ether and thought they could win by being the political wing of Which magazine. Unfortunately, that didn't work. Unfortunately, we don't like, I presume, what the Conservatives stand for in this room. But they had a coherent, clear message, which they repeated over and over again until we tore our hair out. Labour had nothing. Apart from that, their campaign was great. But anyway, that's what happened. And we can go on about the right-wing media and character assassination and all the rest of it, and I'm sure that did have an impact. But voters aren't sheep, and we can't allow, I'm afraid, the Labour leadership to be let off the hook. They had a disastrous campaign. They destroyed their own chance, their own opportunity of forming a government, as Kate said, at a time when working people suffered the longest fall in living standards since Queen Victoria sat on the throne of this country. And at the end of the day, they hold responsibility for that defeat. And that's what happened. Now, in terms of the status quo maintains itself by three main ways. Firstly, the idea that there is no alternative, that any attempt to challenge the existing prevailing order will unleash disaster for all of society, so you better grin and bear it. The second, that what is good for the rich is good for society as a whole, that if you cut their taxes, wealth will shower down on the rest of us, and again, if you challenge the rich, they'll all flee and the economy will collapse around them. And finally, the cynical, constant redirecting of anger away from those at the top to people's neighbours down the streets. Turn on unemployed people, public sector workers, immigrants, for things like the failure of governments to build housing, to provide secure jobs, to ensure that wages don't fall year after year after year, to have proper pensions for private sector workers and so on. That constant redirecting of anger. Those, for me, are the main ways the status quo keeps itself together. Now, we had a great protest last week. It was a fantastic and inspiring protest, and it felt brilliant to be there. But we've got to be clear that protests like that are a launch pad. They're not a feel-good exercise. They're not a therapy session. They're not there so we can all turn up, pat ourselves on the back and go home. They're a launch pad for us to go off and organise in our community and reach the unreached. That includes the millions who did not vote, and the poorer you are, the less likely you are to vote. Universal suffrage won at such cost and sacrifice in our country, and now unwinding by stealth. As the poorer you are, the less likely you are to vote, disengaged from a political system from which you feel profoundly alienated from. We have to organise those people. But also when it comes to UKIP voters, and maybe I dissent on the previous analysis, we can't just write off the 4 million voters who voted for UKIP. We can take on UKIP all right, an establishment party which stands for cutting taxes on the rich and redirecting the blame of people at their everyday real concerns away from the powerful to their neighbours. That many of those people who voted for UKIP were working class people with concerns on housing and jobs and wages and services who were peddled a politics of fear. It's our responsibility to give them a politics of hope instead. We won't do that by dismissing them and writing them off. We will drive them even further into the arms of UKIP. I can't think of anything more counterproductive and suicidal than that. Let's break UKIP by winning over many of the people who vote for them, who are crying out and desperate for hope, which currently they are denied. We have to think about our language. Most people don't think in terms of left or right. They think in terms of issues to be addressed in a way that's convincing and coherent. that resonates with their experiences, that is told in a language that they understand. Look at the success of Podemos in Spain. They've ripped up the old rule book and they've tried to communicate in a new and different way, the language of common sense. That's what our enemies do. They talk in a language, often a deceitful and outright lying language, but they try and speak in the language of common sense. We have to do that. It's easy, and I do it all the time. I speak in a way which can resonate with people who already agree with what I have to say. But I have to find different ways of communicating that reach out to people who don't already agree with me. We have to think, there's a political linguist called George Lakoff, and the point he makes is the right use stories, the left use facts and statistics all the time. But friends, most people don't think in terms of facts and statistics. We're human beings, we're not machines. So when I say over 1 million people have had their benefits sanctioned in the last year, for most people that means little. But if I talk about a 6-year-old army veteran called Stephen Taylor, who sold poppies for the Royal Legion for maimed and injured former comrades of his, desperately looking for work at the age of 60 years old, whose benefits were sanctioned on the basis his volunteering for the Royal Legion showed he wasn't trying hard enough to look for work. That story makes far more an impact than me throwing statistics at you in a way I often, all too often, am guilty of doing. We have to think about how we appeal, just to wrap up. We've got to remember, our base is the working people, the working class, however you want to call it. That is low income and middle income people as well. That is our basic coalition. We have to think, for example, about the self-employed. Often precarious workers denied pensions, denied basic workers' rights like paid maternity leave, paid sick leave. People like me have said all too little about those sorts of people. Democratic public ownership instead of the old top-down nationalisation. The new industries of the future like renewable energy. Good quality skilled jobs that take on the environmental crisis. Let's think outside the box. Let's be more imaginative. Let's back Jeremy. He's going to run an inspiring grassroots bottom-up campaign that will throw many of these fantastic, inspiring ideas to build that movement. But it's up to everybody in this room. Let's reassess our own approach. Let's reach the unreached. Let's stop speaking to each other, and let's reach the millions of people out there who, above all else, are desperate for hope, which all too often, perhaps, we've not been as good at building and fighting for. We will win. We will change this society and build a society run in our interest, not theirs at the top. But it does mean a real, proper debate about how we reach people. Let's go out there, inspire people, and win.
Thanks, Owen. Next, we'll hear from Lindsey German. Lindsey is convener of the Stop the War Coalition. She's the author of many books, the latest of which is How a Century of War Changed the Lives of Women, and she's also a member of Counterfire. Lindsey.
Thanks very much, and it's good to be not just with so many people in the room but also on this platform, because we're all people who, whatever political differences we might have, and we do have political differences over how we approach things, what organisations we're in and so on, I think we've all worked together in terms of mass campaigns and mass organising, and it seems to me that this is the thing that is the challenge for the left, is how do we make our politics relevant to very, very large numbers of people. And I have to say that I do think that last weekend was a very, very good starting point for that. And I agree absolutely that any of those demonstrations are the start, but to get 250,000 people, lots of young people, lots of working class people on a demonstration, which may be counterintuitive to a lot of those people, it struck me was a very important thing to do. And I think that those of us who've done these kinds of things, and those of us who've been working sometimes for a very long time in these campaigns, we need to think about how we turn that into a permanent challenge, not just to this particular government, but to the kind of system in which we live, the system which has seen a growth in inequality between rich and poor, a system which has seen the rich get richer, a system where we have people in some of the richest parts of the country having to go to food banks and having to do all those sorts of things. So it seems to me this is what we're discussing today, and when people look at why Labour lost, I think we also have to be you know, there's this sort of narrative that comes from all the leaders apart from Jeremy, and can I just, like everybody else, I'd like to pay tribute to Jeremy, and he's not my MP, but I work in his constituency, and what a pleasure it is to see him on his bike. One of the few MPs that you see cycling around, and certainly one of the few that you see doing all these sorts of campaigns. But it's actually about, let's look at what actually happened in the election, because the narrative is, it was all terrible, everybody stuck with the Tories or didn't go anywhere near to the left, and the left did very, very badly. Actually, you wouldn't think that even Labour's vote went up quite considerably in this election. You wouldn't think that actually in Scotland, whatever we feel about the SNP, and people have different views about the SNP and why people voted for them, that vote for the SNP represented, at least in part, a vote against austerity and a challenge to the left of Labour, which Labour absolutely failed to match up to. So I think we need to recognise that. I think we need to recognise that in London and in the other big cities around the country, around England, you found that actually there were swings to Labour. People like Jeremy and Diane Abbott and John McDonnell, a whole number of other people, Caroline Lucas for the Greens in Brighton, all increased their majorities, all did very, very well. And the reason I say this is because we shouldn't allow the narrative to be that Labour lost because it wasn't cautious enough, Labour lost because it was too left-wing. Well, that's a kind of surprise to probably most of us in the room, and we didn't notice that little phase of the Labour campaign. And we shouldn't also allow the narrative to be that it's all about immigration. I thought it was very, very powerful when people, I think it was Leanne Wood from Plaid Cymru who said in one of the debates, all the problems in this country can't be put down to immigration, and that, I thought, got lots and lots of support, just as when Jeremy stood up for migrant workers on the televised debate the other week, that got lots of support. So I think this is an incredibly contradictory election result, and we need to recognise that. We also need to recognise something else, that it's part of the long-term erosion of Labour, which has been going on, I think Owen referred to it, it's been going on for decades. And this is one of the things, if you look at the large number of people who didn't vote at all in this election, the very substantial number, these will overwhelmingly be people from traditional Labour areas, from areas where people feel they won't go and vote Tory. And this is, I think, where the UKIP picked up some of their votes, people who won't go and vote Tory because they realise that's the boss's party, but who are so fed up with Labour that they can either won't vote or they can be attracted to a party like UKIP because they believe some of the stories about immigration. So I think it's important to recognise that long-term erosion. And another thing that's gone on at the same time as that long-term erosion is a big increase in the number of mobilisations of people outside of established politics, outside of Parliament, outside of all those sorts of things. And it seems to me that if you look at the period since the big demonstrations in Seattle, which is, well, 16 years ago now, so it's a long, long time ago, where people first got on the streets against globalisation in very, very large numbers. If you look at the big European social forums, the big anti-war protests, the big protests we now hopefully will see more and more of around austerity, it seems to me you have to see those two things going hand in hand. In other words, there's a sort of do-it-yourself fight for change, which it doesn't just say we're relying on people to vote, or we're relying on getting MPs elected in order to change things. And I would argue that really we have to look in a couple of directions. The first thing is we're under such attack that everybody sensible on the left, and we all know there are people who aren't sensible on the left, but by and large, they're certainly not represented on the panel, and I guess they're not mostly in this audience. Everybody sensible on the left knows the key question people want is how can we unite in order to change things? How can we get together, whatever our difference is, to overcome these attacks and to move the movement forward, and then see how things develop? And I think it's very, very important that we do that. So that, it seems to me, is the first thing. We might not start from here. We might not want to start from a situation where there's been a defeat where we have a Tory majority, or albeit a small majority government, but this is where we are, and we have to find ways of uniting, even if we can't unite necessarily in the same organisation or in the same party. And that, to me, is a very, very important thing. The other thing that is very, very important is that we shouldn't start with electoral politics. There is a big tradition in this country which says that real change comes from what people do. It's what the trade union movement was built on. It's how we got the vote. It's how the suffragettes won. It's how the poll tax was got rid of, which Labour told us at the time you couldn't do it. It's how all these things happened, and we have to return to that tradition of extra parliamentary activity on the ground, grassroots activity, which really helps to build a mass movement. And therefore, in my opinion, there's too much talk about electoral challenges in this country. Let's face it, we've just had an election, so this isn't the most important thing, and too little about building the movements. And it seems to me we should change that emphasis, that we should say we want to build these movements as part of building a wider political project. I agree very much with the priorities that Kate put forward as to what are the important things now. The first is that Jeremy's campaign is incredibly important for all of us, whether we're in the Labour Party or not, whether we're able to vote through Labour or through the trade unions or as a supporter of Labour. The crucial thing is that we campaign and organise, because what Jeremy has done is to put the anti-austerity argument on the agenda. You only have to think what would have happened if Jeremy had not got on that ballot paper, and if it had been the three candidates, Liz Kendall and I'm forgetting them as well, and Andy Burnham. At the moment, Jeremy's arguments are shifting those people in the middle towards, very, very tentatively, but more towards the left. If it had been Liz Kendall, they'd all have been chasing her about being harsher on immigrants, cracking down on benefits, welfare benefits, scroungers, and all the other things they'd be doing. And just having somebody who puts that argument makes a huge difference. And the bigger Jeremy's vote is, the better for all of us and the better for the left everywhere. And that is a very important thing. The second thing is Greece. I mean, what an absolute disgrace that an elected government in Greece is dragged off to Brussels every week or so, is lectured about how they haven't done their homework properly, is given back their proposal, which I think made far, far too many concessions against the poor and the working class in Greece, and much too many concessions in favour of the rich in Greece. They're given it back, their proposal, with red lines written all over it, as if it's some bad-tempered professor marking them at the end of the day. These are people who are now saying we want a referendum. I'm absolutely in favour of that referendum, and I think everybody in this country should campaign for Greece to vote no, because that is the only way they can stand up for their austerity. The third thing is that we need to build the People's Assembly. We have a massive opportunity now to build this across the country, and it seems to me that that is something which has to be absolutely the heart of things. Just my final sentence is this, that I'm a socialist, I'm involved in Countfire, an organisation which is outside of Parliament. We don't have any plans to stand candidates at the moment. I don't want to have a situation again where we get 0.4% of the vote. I don't think that helps the left to stand in elections, not have a base and then get a useless vote. I think it only strengthens the right wing in Labour, who say there's no alternative to Labour, actually. But I do think the need for organisation, the need for people who campaign outside of Parliament, the need for people who build Stop the War, who build the People's Assembly, who build all those things, is an absolutely crucial part of the left, and we shouldn't allow the left just to be framed purely in electoral terms, because the real powerful left in this country repeatedly has been people who they worked with in electoral terms, they backed MPs like Jeremy, but they built organisation regardless of what went on in Parliament, and that's what we're going to have to do again.
Thanks very much, Lindsey. And Jeremy. Jeremy needs no introduction. He is MP for Islington North and is genuinely the most inspirational candidate on the ballot for Labour leadership. Jeremy.
thank you very much, and thank you for inviting me, and such a brilliant group of friends there are on the platform here. We've marched, met and worked together for a very long time, and Lindsey's right, yeah, of course we have political debates, of course sometimes we think tactics could be different, but we are socialists, we're together, we're working together, we're trying to achieve the same thing ultimately. And what I'm really enjoying about this current involvement I have with this particular enterprise in which I've undertaken, I'll explain more of it later on, is the way that it's suddenly changed people's perception and discussion about politics. And I'll give you an example. This morning I was rushing from my house via the Actonist store at the end of the Durham Road, which the Stop the War Coalition relies on for its sustenance, and just popped in to buy a paper and a couple of things, and as I came out, I'm really trying to get down to the station to get to Euston to go to a Hustings in Birmingham, and this guy sort of props his bike up against the fruit stall and says, "Now Jeremy, about the economic policy." I said, "Yeah, I'm really sorry about this, but I've got to catch a train." He says, "You know, about the economic policy, I've been thinking about it." I said, "I'm sure you have." He said, "This austerity thing, I think it's a really bad idea. What do you say to that?" So I said, "Well, I think you're dead right." "Are you going to do anything about it?" I said, "I'm going to try my best, but I've really got to go to Birmingham." And anyway, he's promised to come and discuss it with me further next week at somewhat greater lengths. But in the post-election analysis that's been happening, it's been a very interesting one. Lots of things have come out. In England, Labour put on 1 million votes. In Scotland, Labour lost a very large number of votes. And in Wales, the vote was about level pegging, but Labour lost seats and gained very little. Where did we lose votes? We lost votes in England to UKIP, we lost votes in England to the Greens, we lost votes in Scotland to the SNP. Now, during the election campaign, I spent a great deal of time knocking on doors in my own constituency. I did 34 canvassing sessions in my own constituency, and I went to 10 other constituencies during the month of the campaign and knocked on a very large number of doors and had some amazing and arcane conversations with large numbers of people, particularly in the days that I spent in Thanet, when Nigel Farage was around. I mean, some of it was sort of so bizarre, it was kind of off the wall. The whole place is stuffed full of UKIP rhetoric about immigrants taking all our jobs and so on and so on and so on and all that stuff. And a group of Czech Roma people had set up a one of those hand car wash places in Margate where there used to be a petrol station. And they were doing very well, they were working very hard, they're cleaning cars and all that sort of thing. What is there not to like about that? The woman across the road who ran a bridal wear stroke hairdressing salon had so festooned her establishment with Union Jacks and St George's flags you couldn't really see what the business was, and she would need the light on 24/7 because she had blocked all the daylight out with all these flags. I think she wasn't trying to attract any custom from the Czech Roma people across the way. And Nigel Farage had paid for the biggest poster I've ever seen, sort of 32-sheet poster of a picture of Nigel Farage and White Cliffs of Dover and a few Union Jacks and bluebirds flying around and, you know, just about every sort of pastiche of nationalism you could possibly think of. This had been ripped up quite a lot and bits of blood had been painted on it coming out of his ears and things like this. Some quite enterprising artwork had been added, and then somebody with a more cerebral process came with a very large printed poster and put over it, quoting the great Oscar Wilde, that said, "Patriotism is the last vestige of a last refuge of a scoundrel," and put that up above the thing. And so you thought, well, yes, well, in a way, a kind of debate has happened here. When you're knocking on doors, you've got some completely lunatic answers, to put it mildly. People would say something about housing, something about jobs, and so on, and you say, well, yes, we've got to get rid of 0 hours contracts. Well done, Ed Miliband, for bringing that up during the campaign. Yes, you've got to bring up improved wages, you've got to have a living wage, not a minimum wage, all this sort of thing. And then they turn around and say, yeah, but it's all the fault of immigrants, isn't it? And I said, what is the fault of the immigrants? Everything. So you sort of say, hang on a minute, What about your doctor? Oh, Dr. Patel, he's a great guy. Okay, where did Dr. Patel come from? I don't know. And so you end up having some fairly basic conversations with people about the nature of our society. But they were so full of this rhetoric that all that mattered was bashing people that have come here, worked incredibly hard, made an incredible contribution, paid more in taxes than they've ever taken out in benefits. And also, this anti-immigrant rhetoric, what does it say to the grandson or granddaughter of Jamaican migrants who came here in the 1950s and have worked their socks off for their whole life for the benefit of all of us? What's it saying to them? What's it saying about their role in society? There's something deeply nasty and unpleasant about it. And so when the issue came up at the Nuneaton hustings, I just thought, I'm going to say it exactly as I think it. We are not going to blame immigrants for any economic problem in this country. The shortages come from somewhere else. The shortages come from all sorts of other reasons. And what we need to do is remember what socialism is about. It is about solidarity, it is about principles, it is about standing up. And on Thursday I was in Scotland and we had a hustings at the Scottish Parliament, and then I had a meeting with Neil Findlay, very good guy, and other people, and then I spent a couple of hours talking to a group of mainly Labour activists, but not exclusively, in the Edinburgh Council building. A very interesting discussion it was too. They were talking about the alleged anti-austerity message of the SNP. Yes, they do give an anti-austerity rhetoric in their message. The problem is their economic policy doesn't add up in any sense, and they are supporting the privatisation of CalMac, Caledonian MacBrain ferry services. They failed to bring ScotRail back into public ownership, and their idea of fiscal autonomy will actually bring into Scotland a sort of turbo drive austerity at the present time. Surely what we need to do is challenge the poverty that exists in Scotland, challenge the issue of health inequality in Scotland, and challenge the need for greater spending on the poorest people and the poorest communities in Scotland, and also, of course, challenge the, and I'll come on to this in a moment, issues of trident and nuclear weapons. We did lose, Labour did lose votes, the Greens in England, on an anti-austerity message. Quite clear about that, because what I found throughout the election was the fundamental dilemma between listening to people on doorsteps who would say, yeah, they're going to vote Labour, yes, they agree with us on this, this and this, and then realising that the plans being produced by Ed Balls and others would actually mean very large cuts in local government expenditure, a continuation of the adult social care crisis, and so many other things. And so post-election, those of us on the left of the Labour Party had a number of meetings. We organised a Labour Representation Committee open discussion the Tuesday after the election. We then raised the issue of why we lost the election, the failure to mobilise people, the failure to oppose the fundamentals of austerity and what it means, and why we should do something about it. We then had an initial discussion about what we should do. My view was that there should not be a leadership contest, that there should be a process for about a year when the Labour Party could examine itself, why it failed to oppose austerity, why it lost the confidence of lots of working class voters, and why in desperation people turned to UKIP as if waving a flag would ever build a hospital, a house or a home of any sort. We didn't achieve that. I raised these questions in the Parliamentary Labour Party, and unfortunately they decided to set a leadership election. So we then had a discussion, what do we do about it? And we then took a decision which some thought was risky, foolhardy. Yes, I heard the tap, I'll give you two more. Sorry, can I just finish on this point? Raised the issue of running a leadership candidate, and by a process of elimination, there was no other candidates. I was asked to step forward and undertake this task. I am obviously happy to do it and enjoy doing it. Why did we get on the ballot paper? Because some of the new MPs, Clive Lewis, Cat Smith, Kate Osamore, Imran Hussain, Becky Long-Bailey, a number of others, immediately said, yes, we'll go for it, we're going to do it, we're going to put up an anti-austerity candidate. Others, Kelvin Hopkins, John MacDonald, Dennis Skinner, Graham Morris, joined in immediately. We were then stuck on 12 nominations. There was a bit of a flurry when we went from 11 to 12 when I realised I hadn't nominated myself. We which somebody pointed out to me was a gap. And then what happened was, there was an enormous number of people, not in the Labour Party, some in the Labour Party, got onto their MPs saying, please allow us a debate and allow us a contest. And there was tens of thousands of emails and so on, messages sent over that weekend, and with 120 seconds to go, we got past the 35 number required to get on the ballot paper, and since then, we've been part of that debate, and we're going to be part of that debate. We've had 6 hustings, and we've got 19 hustings to go. Now, I'll finish on these points, because I'd like to say, fundamentally, we don't know what the result's going to be. I don't know any more than anybody else does. But what I want to see at the end of this is a stronger left in this country, a social movement opposed to austerity that is strong, political, demanding, and doesn't bow down before what the Tories are trying to do. 12 billion cuts in welfare, a budget coming up, all those things. Have an alternative, oppose them, fight against them, and as we stop the poll tax, I think we can make a lot of changes. They are paper tigers when all's said and done. Second point, on international policy. I was a founder of Stop the War Coalition. We've all marched together in Stop the War Coalition. We need to build a different foreign policy that isn't based on military global reach, nuclear weapons, nuclear annihilation, or starting one war after another, but recognise fundamentally the inequalities in the world, and those inequalities are being played out with those thousands that are dying in the Mediterranean, trying to reach a place of safety as they escape from the wars in the Middle East. And the last point I make is this, because it's unfair on the others for me to go on too long, is that we are promoting a online manifesto, an online book of ideas about socialism and social justice in this country. And if there's one legacy I want to leave behind at the end of this campaign is this: teach our children history. Teach them how we got a National Health Service, how we got a welfare state, how we got a Human Rights Act, how we got an Equalities Act, how we changed society. From the Peasants' Revolt to the Civil War to the Chartists to the Red Clydeside and everybody else, we have a rich vein of militant history that brought about changes. We walk in their footsteps in order to oppose the nonsense that the bankers have to be appeased in order to cut our services. Greece is standing up, we can stand up. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jeremy, and thank you to all of our panel. So we can squeeze, I think, about 15 minutes of questions and contributions. You can just indicate to me, and I'd urge you to just be a bit succinct so we can get as many questions and contributions as possible. And if you're going on too long, I will tap, although I can't hear that. But anyway, yes. Yeah. There'll be a roving mic coming. Just indicate and I'll write your name down.
Okay, thank you very much. Is this on?
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much. I agree with what people were saying about, why Labour lost, but I think there's something else that hasn't been discussed, which is really, I think, that Labour was outplayed by the Tories. And if you want my view on the austerity thing, I think that George Osborne deliberately stalled recovery and deliberately prolonged austerity, so that every time there were swinging cuts having to be made, and every time there's bad economic news, he'd turn around and say, well, the last Labour government's to blame. It is a shame, I think, that the Labour Party didn't stand up for itself a bit more on this one. But the reason why he felt able to get away with that is because he realised that he'd won the blame game in relation to austerity. It wasn't the bankers who were at fault according to the Tory narrative, it was Labour. Now we all know that's wrong, but I think we've got to perhaps do a bit more in challenging that. It's partly the media's fault, it's also partly because of that stupid note that Liam Byrne left behind the Treasury saying there's no money left. And at the next election, when Cameron or whoever it is brings that note out of their pocket, as they will do, to try and blame Labour, we've got to tell the Tories to grow up, and we've got a more sophisticated and nuanced understanding of the economy, and we're not going to fall for that again. I think that's really important, so we're not going to let them play the blame game again, because that's the only narrative the Tories know, I think.
Thank you. Yes, you over there.
My name's Jessie, and I ran food banks and clothes banks and every other bank to try and help vulnerable people. And one of my big critiques is that political people do not know how to speak to people. The people who I work with, they don't even understand the word austerity. They understand my stomach doesn't hurt, and they understand that, they understand that my stomach hurts because I can't eat. That's what they understand, that's their language. I want to know how we communicate as the left to people who our messages aren't reaching. Sometimes they just say to me, I don't even understand what you're talking about. And I guess alongside that, in terms of the media, we have got to recognise we've got the Sun, we've got the people who do speak the language of the working man, but they're speaking lies. How do we come against that in a big way that will speak to the masses? Thank you.
My concern is with regards to what's been said already about, we need to have an alternative argument. We need to be united, because the problem I seem to find is that when we're saying about alternative argument, we're still doing the blame game. A lot of this blame on the Green Party for standing in the election. That was part of Labour's strategy. There's a lot of blame on other parties of the left standing, and at the end of the day, who's to say that people that voted for Greens didn't vote because they had better Green policies, right? Again, and that's the same with the racism that went on with UKIP. Not enough was done at that time to actually oppose it from the Labour Party. The racism of UKIP, right? There's a lot of tokenism about that. It seemed to me that it was dependent on the black MPs to actually turn around and say directly that UKIP are a racist party. And that, until now, we're still not doing it. We're doing it in hindsight now, but it's still not enough. Because the problem is, the racism is only going to get worse. With the EU referendum coming on, we're seeing people killed in the Mediterranean, being left to die in the Mediterranean. We're seeing it all around the world, and not enough is being done to actually point UKIP out for what they are.
Thank you. In the white t-shirt, and then you in the black t-shirt.
Hi, I have a question for you, Jeremy. I just wanted to clarify something because I was a little bit uncomfortable maybe with some of your rhetoric, and I just wanted to kind of pull you up on that and see what you meant by it. You said that we shouldn't blame immigrants. The problems in our country aren't the fault of immigrants, but you mentioned that your particular wording was that we welcome these immigrants who come here and work really hard and pay more tax than they take in welfare. And I'm simply wondering about those immigrants. Presumably there are some who come here and claim welfare and don't pay so much tax. Do we welcome them as well?
Okay. Yeah, over here. If there are any questions, you can indicate to me and I'll write your name down.
I don't think enough emphasis can be put on apathy and reaching sections of society that feel alienated. The sections that Owen's written about quite a lot, like for instance, the kids involved in the London riots and areas that have been lost to politics. And the woman behind me mentioned the language that these people just, politics is something that happens in London, government is something that happens in London, and they don't see voting as a way of changing that because it's lost to them, and the language is lost on them. I come from a part of Yorkshire that, I don't know anyone who votes there. None of the young people, they don't care about politics. They don't see it as a part of their lives. And how are we going to engage these people and make them care? Because they do care about things, and they can care. So how do you get them to care about this?
Thanks. The woman at the back, and then Richard. Right here, in the black shirt.
My question mainly is Jeremy, but when are politicians going to start using the term refugee again? Because I'm sick of the term migrant. These people dying on boats are not migrants. they are refugees. They are coming from war-torn countries and they are dying, and we need to start using the term refugees.
Thank you. Richard, and then James.
Thanks. It's not really a question. It's a thank you to the rest of the panel for the insights that they've had, and a thank you to Jeremy for standing, because one of the consequences of you actually getting on the ballot sheet, Jeremy, is as soon as the word came out that you were considering standing and that you got a couple of nominations, somebody down in London in Unite put up a thing like "Back Jezza, the leader," and I put it up on my Facebook page as I was told to. I was absolutely stunned by the hundreds of people, because a lot of people on my Facebook page are family and friends. They don't necessarily have a political take on life. I was absolutely gobsmacked by, within 12 hours, the hundreds of people that had copied it onto their Facebook pages as well. Now, it's absolutely clear that whether or not they know the intricacies of your particular politics, the fact that you are seen as somebody that stands up for the downtrodden and are prepared to speak out against austerity has obviously touched a blue touch paper. It also means that I was asked by drivers, I'm a branch secretary of a road haulage branch, I was asked by drivers in my workplace, are we going to be backing Jeremy for leader? Is it right that we can affiliate to Unite and Unite will pay to Labour and Unite will pay the affiliation fee? Can I vote for it? Now, what I'm really, really pleased about is it's opening up in people's heads the idea that there is a view of the world that they can identify with, and in some part, or to some degree, play a part in trying to change. I don't care at the end of the day, Jeremy, whether you win the leadership of the Labour Party or not. I agree with you. The important thing will be how far your standing reinvigorates a combative, confident left that allows us to step forward. So, thanks a bunch.
Thanks, Richard. James, and then the comrade at the back. James, yeah, just there. And then comrade at the back. And I'd also encourage more women to speak as well.
I feel like I'm manufacturing disagreement, because I do kind of care if Jeremy wins, because there's something to be said. There's something to be said for being on the left in general, that you can get into your heads, it's another glorious defeat, and you do these things that's kind of right, and you don't expect to get anything out of it. And if there's one thing that I felt all of this year, because in Syntagma Square in Athens, when Syriza got elected, is that it might just be the start of the point at which it's possible to talk about actually winning things. That you're not just here to say, well, we go out and we fight, or maybe we lose, or oh dear, and we've got pat ourselves on the back. Never mind that. I am tired. I am not spending my entire bloody life apologising for losing and then losing and feeling sorry about it. Forget that. What's brilliant about Jeremy's campaign, I think, it's brilliant that you're standing anyway. It means that however good your result is, you know, frankly, the Blairites are so arrogant. If you don't come last, that'll be a defeat for them. They'll take it very, very badly indeed, right? But if there is this slim little chance that, contrary to what was supposed to happen with the changes to the Labour leadership electoral system introduced last year, the idea was it would drown out all the members, drown out all the trade unions, you'd have a US Democrat-style primary system where you pick one of these glorious leaders, you have no real say in policy, all that sort of thing. That has been blown wide open by you standing, because it's now possible for anyone at all who remotely supports you standing to pay their £3 and get a vote. And that says to me that we can get tens of thousands of people voting for you, and you can give them an absolute kicking from which the Blairites and the Labour Party will never, ever really recover. That's why I'm optimistic. I do care if you win. I don't know if you will or you won't, but there's at least the possibility of doing something really extraordinary out of this.
Hi, my name's Felix. I'm very sympathetic with Jeremy. I hope that Jeremy does as well as possible. But we must recognise that there must be a kind of party to back any leader, however well they do. And what I wanted to ask is, the Labour Party is a party that has supported the same economic logic that is being used now in the past. They supported the kind of monetarist economic policy for 13 years when they were in power, and it's one that now the Tories are continuing with. It's also a party that previously supported illegal wars and renewed the Trident missile program as well. It is we've seen in Greece and we've seen in Spain the radical parties of the left are newly emergent parties who aren't bogged down by having to defend right-wing records. Is it the case that the Labour Party is genuinely the forum that that people who have radical politics can align themselves to, or do we need a new Syriza-style, Podemos-style political party in Britain that we can hang our hats on? Thank you very much.
Thanks. We'll have Chris, and then the man at the back, and then Penny, and then we'll ask the speakers to come back.
Yeah, I too think that Jeremy's campaign is fantastic and that it's opening up a big debate which wasn't there at all in the mainstream about austerity and about the kind of politics that is needed in this country. But I think one of the secrets to Jeremy's popularity and to his ability to electrify the political situation is not just that he's a principled socialist, a great speaker and a very nice guy, it's also that he is associated with the movements. And I think that actually registers with people. People know that Jeremy has been out campaigning against the wars. People know that Jeremy will support every campaign, not just in his own constituency, but all around the country, that he's been on platform after platform for the People's Assembly. And people like that, because it makes them feel confident in his approach. And I think we should draw a lesson when we think about the relationships between the left and the movements from that, because when you think about Europe, there was or could have been no Syriza without the massive demonstrations, without the years of strikes and street mobilisations that have taken place in Greece over the last 3 or 4 years. The same is true in Spain. No Podemos without the, whatever we may think of them, without the massive mobilisations and the occupations against austerity that have taken place. The movements lead to the possibility of political opposition, and it's important that we understand that when we think strategically about going forward. But there's also one other point, which is even when you do have a political electoral alternative that is quite radical, like we have in Greece, even then, as we've seen in the last few weeks, that's not enough in itself. In the end of the day, the question of what happens in Greece, in the referendum and beyond, under attack by the European governments, under attack by the capitalists even in their own country, the decisive question will be, in the end of the day, whether the movement mobilises to defend them and to force them to oppose austerity and to continue their fight against the Troika. So, in all these different conjunctures, the question of the movement remains absolutely critical.
Thank you. So, just last one at the back.
Racist and undemocratic.
I said the opposite. I didn't say that, but carry on. I didn't say that. Everyone else knows I didn't say it.
If you could carry on, that'd be great.
You said something to that effect.
No.
Were you, nevertheless, delighted to hear that Arthur Scargill's Socialist Party adopted as its primary election platform the immediate and unconditional withdrawal of this country from membership of the European Union?
Thank you.
My second point,
okay, quickly,
to respect of what Kate and Jeremy have said in respect to Trident. And it's very clear to me that there's an elephant in the room in respect to the matter of Trident and Trident replacement, which we never hear anything about from the so-called left of the Labour Party or even from CND. And that elephant in the room is the matter of this country's membership of NATO. We never hear anything from CND or the left of the Labour Party that membership of NATO is the sine qua non for retention of Trident and for replacement of Trident.
Okay.
We never hear anything about
Thank you,
that.
thank you. Penny.
I'm going to make no apology for saying Manchester. I've been saying it all day, and I'm going to say it to all of you. Owen, you helped launch the Manchester People's Assembly with 700 people 2 years ago.
900, I thought.
To the left, etc. He's not the 7. You're right, the demonstration last Saturday was a platform. It was one blow that we struck. It was a huge blow. And Manchester is another blow for the Tory party conference. Kate, your members in Left Unity are brilliant in Manchester. Please encourage everybody to get involved in building People's Assembly and building the siege of Manchester. Jeremy, I hope you will come to Manchester during the summer and we could have, perhaps in a personal capacity, I could put on a huge event in your support in the summer for the campaign. And Lindsey, obviously, with the Stop the War Coalition and the work around Counterfire, trying to pull all this together. Please, all of you, I don't just want to see you in Manchester, I want to see you, your mates, your networks, your friends, and everybody there. It's got to be huge. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. So, a couple of minutes from each of our speakers. We'll start with Kate.
Okay, first of all, CND is completely opposed to NATO and extremely active on the subject, so I'm sorry you haven't seen any of that coverage. On the question of Manchester, I'm very pleased to say that CND is already organising its Scrap Trident block on that demonstration on the 3rd of November. When is it? October? 4th of October, Sunday the 4th of October at Tory Party Conference, and Left Unity will be active there as well. Great discussion this evening. Just to pick up on one or two things. First of all, I don't know, can't speak for other panel members, but in terms of border controls and immigration, I'm personally, and Left Unity, is against all border controls. So that's the situation there. And then just overall, I've got this view that when we look back in 10 or 20 years on the situation now, we will understand what we are going through now as part of a massive crisis of our political system, a real fundamental systemic crisis. And if you think about the unprecedented levels, really low levels of confidence from the people as a whole in the political system, I think that really illustrates it. The corruption, the exposure of corruption, abuse at the highest levels, extremes of wealth and poverty, incredibly low voting levels in some areas. People saying, they don't know anyone that votes in certain areas. That's endemic across large parts of the country. We've got a cracking of the first past the post system, even though it's still in place. It's been breaking apart and people have been bursting through there. We've got the very union itself cracking. I mean, who of us here thinks that if there's another referendum on Scotland it won't be a yes vote? Everything is in flux, and it may be a long drawn out process, but we have to see ourselves as part of that. And there is no way that putting any kind of sticking plasters on any bits of it are going to work. We have to address it in a much more fundamental kind of way than that. I mean, my own personal view is that Labour is not the answer for all the reasons, the long drawn out decline, European trend and all that kind of thing. And I'm one of the people who believes that we need a new party. And I think that these struggles, all the different organisations we're in, the campaigns we're in, the movements, they are all part of that process, in my view, of moving towards a new party formation. And people have talked about Podemos in Spain, and I'm sure you all saw that in the last couple of weeks, 4 mayors, 4 left-wing mayors were elected in Barcelona, in Madrid, in Cadiz, and they weren't from one party, they were from what were called convergences, alliances of different parties on the left, movements and groups who came together in assemblies to put up a candidate for mayor and so on. And I think that we need really to look at new ways of working together, and those kind of Spanish convergence processes are something that we need to look at very carefully. And then my final point, I absolutely agree, I said it myself, we all have to do everything we can to build support for Jeremy. And I think one of the things that we can do, particularly assuming that probably most of us aren't members of the Labour Party, is to take the struggle outside the Labour Party. If it remains within the Labour Party, I think Jeremy's vote will be limited, because there are many people who say, oh yes, I agree with him, but he won't be able to win us the next election, that somehow he won't be able to make Labour a winning party. We have to take the struggle outside the Labour Party, and Jeremy's campaign will be successful insofar as we unlock new political and social forces in his support. Thank you very much.
Well, firstly, obviously I said the opposite of writing off UKIP voters. I said we shouldn't insult them, that's counterproductive, and we should win them over with the politics of hope, to win them over on issues like housing, jobs, wages and services. I think everybody understood that generally. But I do on the EU, you know, I always support a referendum on the EU. I believe the EU in its current form is undemocratic and a stitch up for a tiny elite at the top. Look at TTIP, look at the behaviour over Greece, and it has to be dramatically overhauled. I think that's what Syriza and Podemos are about, the revolt partly against the undemocratic stitch-up of the EU. We should stand in solidarity with them and build on what they're trying to do all across the continent. In terms of immigration, just to quickly explain, I mean, Jeremy will explain himself. The point Jeremy's making is the statistics, the official studies in immigration show that EU immigrants pay in more overall than they get back from the state. That's all he was saying. They're a net economic benefit. That's all he's saying to the Treasury. Myself, what I would do to popularise that point, because people go, oh, what does that mean in practice? I don't see any of that economic benefit, is to say that areas with high immigration should see the benefits of that extra, you know, the economic contribution of immigrants, and they should receive extra money for public services. And I think that would make the direct link in people's lives between immigration and the economic benefits that come with it, because they pay more in taxes and take less back. An immigration dividend, if you like, or whatever we call it. And just finally, because I think people to make the other points, on language is just absolutely key, and something now, obviously I was been banging on about before. You know, Einstein, there's this quote put to Einstein often that the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. We've got to learn to speak in a different way. That doesn't just mean a language that resonates with just us, with people who already agree with generally where we stand. We've got to reach the people you're talking about. I go to schools all the time, I still look like the youngest person in the room, but when I do go, I meet these young working class people who have burning, you know, they're not stupid, far from it. They're passionate about things, they're passionate about their futures, they're scared about the future, they need hope, but they don't see politics in its current form as a solution to their everyday problems. That link has gone, and we've got to find a way of organising in a community's grassroots up, but also speaking a different language. And you mentioned austerity, you talked about austerity, and what does that mean to people? One of the most Googled results during those leader debates was what is austerity? We take it for granted, all of us, we know exactly what it means. People out there don't, and that should be a wake-up call. We've got to stop talking in a way that resonates with people who already agree, because otherwise we're going to end up basically like political hipsters, like a cultural subset of people who kind of are left-wingness as something that makes us feel good about ourselves and we can talk to each other. I don't want that. I want to win. I want to win people over. There are millions of people who need hope. So let's learn to speak in a different way. And just finally, I think Jeremy, this campaign is going to be a test of that, because he's going to bring a message of hope. He's got this platform, this huge platform, and I think he speaks in a way that's based on decency. People like him. I mean, that's rare for a politician. The others just sound like these robots. He sounds like a human being. That's what people said about him. So let's build on that. Let's all learn from that, and let's start reaching people out there and stop speaking to ourselves all the time.
Okay, I just want to address 2 points. The first is the point that James made, that I want Jeremy to win. Now, I think all of us want to, I hope so. I hope everybody in the room doesn't want one of the other 3 candidates whose names, yet again, are forgettable, to win. But let's also be honest about this kind of thing. I mean, I think Jeremy's going to get a very, very good vote. I have absolutely no idea how much it'll be, but I mean, I hope it'll be enough for him to win. Let's be honest about this. How do you think that is going to go down with a whole number of people inside the Labour Party? I'm talking about the Blairites in particular here, who threatened, even when they thought that Ed Miliband might make some mild deal with the SNP, when they thought there was going to be hung parliament, and they were talking about then joining with the Tories. Now, I think if Jeremy wins, that's fantastic, but it will be the start of a process inside Labour which will be a massively contested process, because there'll be people who say all sorts of things. They'll say, oh, we found one person in Croydon, who actually isn't a Labour supporter, but, you know, is some sort of dreadful Trotskyist, or, you know, or a Tory or whatever. You know, they'll find all those sorts of things. There'll be a massive thing. Let's remember what happened when Tony Benn did really, really well. That was the deputy leader. Let's remember, back in 1981, what did the SDP do? They split the Labour Party. It makes me laugh that Polly Toynbee is daring to write about this topic at all, actually, given that she joined the SDP in 1983. She was a great cheerleader for splitting the Labour Party. That's why Labour lost in 1983, people going about Michael Foot and the double coat. It was essentially because the Labour Party was split between pro-capital Labour Party and people who wanted a left-wing Labour Party. That's what happened. So let's be clear with all these things. It's great progress, but it isn't the end of the story. Same as Syriza isn't the end of the story, because Syriza itself has been divisions over what they should do, and they're under huge pressure. But it's a fantastic step forward for the left that we can get a good vote, and if we win, then that's even better. But it won't be the end of the problem. The other question I wanted to engage with, to answer, was the one that was said about apathy and alienation and why people don't vote. Now, I really think we have to begin to change the agenda here. I don't think we should say that politics is about voting. If we're saying to people once every 5 years you can vote, and it'd be somebody who has read all the opinion polls and they've got to triangulate so that they get the centre ground of, you know, 200,000 people in the whole country who don't agree, and they're going to take all their traditional voters for granted, no wonder people don't vote for them. No wonder people in places like Doncaster, who get nothing out of it and who live in a miserable condition and who feel they're getting poorer, no wonder people don't go and vote for them. And I think we've got to actually say politics isn't about, or not primarily about, where you place your cross every 5 years. It's about how you organise, it's about how you can campaign, and that includes all of us here in different organisations, and all of us here. If you want to change the world, don't rely on even the best politician to do it for you. Don't rely on the best politician. Get that best politician to come and down to your picket line, down to your demonstration, down to your campaign. That's the way we change the world, and that is a message of hope that we really need to get across to people.
Thanks, Lindsey. And Jeremy.
Thanks very much. I'll be very, very quick and very brief because I was too long to be in the earlier part. First of all, the points you made about talking to people in language, absolutely correct. And I know I fall into the same trap we all do. You end up reading economic documents which are bad for your health, and then you end up repeating them, which is even worse for everybody else's health. So you have to be sort of quite careful about the language you use. I use the word austerity. I think I know what it means. I should imagine everybody in this room thinks they know what it means. I talk to people in other circumstances saying austerity, and they are not really sure, but they think I probably know what I'm talking about, so they should defer to me for it. Well, that's bad. That's wrong. So we have to find some different way of doing it. Secondly, a lot of people communicate through social media and not the other way. I mean, I do a sort of test in a lot of places about how many people buy a newspaper every day. Hands up, how many do? It's okay, anybody under 40 buy a newspaper every day? Okay, yes. Guardian, Independent, Morning Star man over there. Yeah, and so social media is a very, very important thing. Now that can work to our advantage because it means that the power of Murdoch and all that to control the information is gone, but their power to set the agenda is still there. And they have cottoned onto social media as well. Social media has become a new, very interesting area of battleground, and I find it absolutely fascinating, and we've got to be using it and out there much more. We've got to recognise that a lot of people, young people, are not working in unionised environments. They don't really know what a union is. They've never been told what a union is. It's possible neither of their parents were either in a union before, when they were in work or whatever. So I think Unite's experiment with the community branches is a good idea. I think there's a blessing in disguise, actually, is the government taking away check-off facilities for PCS, so they've signed up 80% of their members on direct debit instead of buying check-off through the employer. That gives them an independence. We need to develop the concept that a union is part of a social movement. It's not an exclusively workplace-orientated organisation, and a lot of people are responding to that. The issue, very quickly, the issue that was raised over there, fair point. I was using the argument when people are saying immigrants make no contribution to our society, I absolutely think everyone should be entitled to support through the welfare state, whatever their situation, whatever their circumstances, and I will always stand up and defend that. They get it in Germany. It isn't a problem in Germany. Why should it be a problem here? I believe in a universality of a welfare state that is designed to prevent anyone falling into destitution. Go to Euston Road tonight. How many people are sleeping out there? They are destitute. Why? Because we failed them as a society. The last point I make is on what comes out of all this. I'm fascinated by the hustings events that we're going to. We've only been in this campaign for 10 days. I've done 6 hustings already. Amazing numbers of people turning up to them. We had 1,200 people at a hustings this morning in Birmingham. We've got another one tomorrow in Nottingham. We're going all over the place. We've done 6 hustings, and there's 19 more to go over the next month. All over the country, and yes, we are coming to Manchester and other places. And on the back of all those hustings, we're also arranging discussion meetings and activities around them. So when we do one in Glasgow, for example, we're doing a thing with young workers there about unionising McDonald's and unionising the fast food places and all that, because we've got to develop an ability, as all of us, to bring people together to realise their own strengths, realise their own opportunities, realise we don't have to bow down before bankers or multinationals and all the rest of it. We can win things. We can stop wars. We can welcome and support refugees who are victims of wars that we created. We can be strong and feel good about it, and we can win things. So whatever the result of the election, we're already winning because we've changed the debate. Whatever the result, we've changed the debate about austerity, socialism and justice. Thank you.
Thanks everyone, thanks to our panel, thanks everyone for coming. I'm very sorry we went over a bit. Just to say that there's music and comedy in this space, and